to deliver my conference in the presence of Mr. Sato. Thank you so much for the support of the foundation and for being here with us. And I am very much honored to share my presentation with you as well. Thank you. I will be discussing some of the ideological bases of Hinduism. You know that after China, India is the second biggest country in this area of the world. And so I thought that it was important to offer you some of the main perspectives to understand some of the general aspects of Indian culture and society. Because ranging from contemporary politics, and I'm thinking, for instance, about one of the most important political parties in India nowadays, the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP. Well, they have as fundamental basis the tradition of Hinduism, and I'm sure that all of you have heard about castes in India. They have also religious bases, so I thought it would be a good idea to give you some of the fundamentals of Hinduism. First of all, I wanted to show you that India is not a unitary country as far as religion is concerned, because so many religions are practiced in India. Obviously, the majority of the population is Hindu. They follow the Hindu faith, and I will come back to this concept in a moment. But India has also a lot of Muslims, and after that we have also Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, and other religious minorities in India. But I'm going to focus today on Hinduism in India, leaving aside these other religions. Again, I wanted to focus today on Hinduism, and I wanted to explain to you how the basic concepts of Hinduism originated and what these concepts are. The key concepts of Hinduism originated at the time of the Upanishads. The Upanishads go back to more or less the 6th to 2nd century BC. And they were religious texts that belong to the Brahmanist tradition that goes back even farther in time, because Brahmanism is rooted in the history of India, and some of the oldest texts of Brahmanism, especially the Vedas and especially the Rig Veda, can be dated to the 2nd millennium BC, to the end of the 2nd millennium BC and the beginning of the 1st millennium BC. So we are speaking of sacred texts that go back as far as 1000 BC, more or less. But that religion was very different to the religion that is practiced today in India, and that was practiced in India after the more or less the 6th century BC. Because at that time there was a very big religious revolution in India that originated the three main Indian religions, and those religions are Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. They are three different religions, right, but they share the same common roots, and so it is not striking that some of the concepts that we find in the three religions are the same as I will tell you in a few minutes. The writers of the Upanishads, and well, you can imagine that when I'm saying the writers, it's the people who transmitted this text, because there was no writing in India at this time. Writing in India must have started about the end of the 4th century BC or the beginning of the 3rd century BC. But the people who were making this text at the time started to think about this world, and they came to the conclusion that if there is one characteristic of this world, it is the fact that it provokes only suffering in us. And this is the concept of dukkha. We can translate this concept as existential suffering. And they began to ask themselves whether they could go beyond this idea, the limits of the world that we can access to through our senses. And They also realize that there is nothing that is stable in the world, because if we look around us, everything is in continuous change, everything is moving, and we have no permanent supports. We have nothing we can resource to that will be there forever. So it is no wonder that they call the word Jagat, and that is a participle in Sanskrit. It means what moves, what is moving, and they also call the word Prakriti, and that means transformation, change. And this is because of that, because they realize that they couldn't take anything as stable, as permanent, as definitive, because nobody will be here after some years, nothing will remain after some years, so we cannot have confidence, we cannot rely on anything if there is only this world. This maiden poses themselves a very important question, and that question is whether there is a universal truth or reality. I am referring to truth and reality because the underlying Sanskrit word is satya, and it has both meanings at the same time. Satya means both true and reality, because if something is true, it must be real, and the other way around, if something is real, it must be true. And this is a very important question because it's the fundamental, the answer is radically different in Buddhism and in Hinduism. The answer for Buddhism is no, there is no universal truth or reality, and the answer for Hinduism is yes, there is a universal truth or reality. The metaphor they use to explain this is the metaphor of a wheel, and the question would be, there is a spoke of the wheel, and the answer for Hinduism is yes, there is one, and the answer for Buddhism is no, there is nothing that provides sense, that supports the wheel. If, as Hindus believe there is a universal truth or a universal reality, then we must we must try to define that reality, and that's where the concept of Brahman emerges. They call this reality Brahman, and it is difficult to define this Brahman because it is not comparable to anything that we know through our senses. So we cannot define it by any of the usual characteristics that we use when we are trying to explain something about our usual world, because we won't be able to characterize it either by a color, by the way it tastes, the way it looks like, because it will be radically different. Otherwise it would be part of the world, and it has to be something that gives sense to the world, but in another sense it is outside the world. That's why they usually refer to it just by calling it that, and that just means that, and it's a way of avoiding a definition. They are talking about that, and in that way they don't need to provide a definition of Brahman. Sometimes they also refer to it by the expression Tad Ekam, that one, the one, because it's the only thing, the only permanent thing. And again, it is a way of avoiding to try to, it's a way to avoid needing a definition of it. Sometimes they call it Tad Anantan, that unlimited, the unlimited. Because as opposed to the things that we can know of through our senses, it has no limits, because otherwise it would belong again in the world, it would be part of the world, and it would be one thing. And obviously Brahman is not a thing. It is what gives sense to the world, it is the reality that provides sense to the whole world, but it is not part of the world in that sense. And sometimes, and this is very interesting, they call that reality nirguna. And nirguna means literally lacking any quality. But this is not something negative. You have to understand that in the sense I was trying to explain to you before. It has none of the qualities of the other things. So that's why it is called nirguna. Because we cannot use any of the qualities we are usually familiar with to define this superior reality. Another important question that began to be thought of at the time of the Upanishads, it's the idea of samsara, the cycle of rebirth, the cycle of reincarnation. And this is something common to all native religions of India. Reincarnation is something that you can find in Hinduism, in Buddhism, and in Jainism. That's why I was telling you before that all the three native religions in India share this belief in reincarnation. And this will be important for the idea of caste and for some of the things I will be referring to a bit later. But coming back to the first idea, the idea that living basically is suffering, then it is nothing but logical that we need to find a way out of this world. Because if this world is only a source of suffering, it is only a source of pain, then we have to reach the liberation. And that is the concept of moksha. Moksha means liberation of the cycle of rebirths. And that's the superior goal that every human being should pursue. But then there is another fundamental question. If we are part of the world, and we are in this world, so we are part of this world, how can we reach this goal of liberating ourselves from the bonds to this world? And the way we can do that is because part of the Brahman, and remember that Brahman is the idea of this universal being, part of the Brahman lies inside everyone. And that part of the Brahman that lies inside everyone is called Atman. Sometimes people translate Atman as soul, but it is different. Because if you stop to think about the idea of soul as opposed to the idea of God in Western tradition, nobody would say that soul is part of God. That's radically different. In Catholic and in general in Christian tradition, soul, human soul and God are completely different. But in Hindu tradition, Atman and Brahman are the same thing. And this is important because it is this fact that provides the possibility of reaching liberation. Because in a way, reaching liberation is like self-reflection. Is becoming aware that this part of the Atman that lies inside each of us belongs in this Brahman. That's why liberation can be reached. But this is a very difficult way, because nobody will be able to reach liberation through this way. So in a later moment, from the time of the Bhagavad Gita, and this is a fundamental text for understanding Hinduism, it is part of one of the most important epic poem in the Indian tradition, the Mahabharata. In the Bhagavad Gita, the god Vishnu himself provides information to Arjuna about different ways of reaching liberation. And from this time on, at least 3 ways of reaching liberation are mentioned in the Hindu tradition. The first is the Jnana Yoga, the way of knowledge. And the way of knowledge means what I have said before. It means being able, by reflecting about this, by mentally concentrating, focusing on this. It is the idea that it is accepting and acknowledging that this world is unreal and we are part of this superior entity of the Brahman. But again, as I was telling before, this is very difficult and not everybody will be able to do that. So in the Bhagavad Gita, other 2 ways of reaching liberation are considered, are taken into account. The first one is what is called Karma Yoga. And karma, I'm sure, is a word that everyone knows. And the meaning of karma in Sanskrit is simply action. Karma means simply action. But in this sense, karma refers to the idea of unselfish action. The basic idea behind this notion of karma yoga is that once we have accepted that we are part of this world, we have to accept as well that we are going to be badly influenced by this world. And the only way of not being tainted, of not being polluted by the actions we perform, is by only performing the actions we must perform. Only performing the actions because we have to, and not because we want to, not because we have an idea, a goal, a target, or so on, because we have an interest in those actions. If we perform our actions just by performing our duty, it is the only way of not being polluted by the actions we perform in this world. I will come back to this again in a moment. And then the third possibility is the Bhakti Yoga. It is the idea that we are human, we are little poor beings, so unless God helps us to reach liberation, it will not be possible for us. And the idea of Bhakti Yoga, it is that we want to be able to reach liberation by ourselves. Then what we have to do is to show bhakti, to show devotion to a God, and hope that this God will liberate us from the cycle of ignorance. So this is the three ways to liberation since the time of the Bhagavad Gita. This was difficult to combine with everyday life, and then the Brahmins, the priests, built a whole ideology around this to combine the possibility of reaching liberation with everyday life. And basically for the life of a man, because women were not considered to be likely to reach liberation because they were women, basically the idea was that if you have been born as a woman, it is because you have done something wrong in your previous life, and it is in a sense a punishment. So this is only devised for men. You have to go as a man through 4 stages in your life. The first stage is as a brahmachari, a student, and it means that for a period of time you will have to go with a priest and learn all you need to learn about religion, both concerning your future life and both concerning your role as a priest, because as a householder you will also have to be a sacrificer and you will be like a little priest in your family. Then you come back to the normal world, and you become a grihastha, householder, and it is your duty, it is your obligation to get married and have children, because that's part of your duty as a man. And then when you are older and you have raised your children, then you should start thinking about liberation and about religion. And then you should go through a third stage. It is the stage of vanaprastha, hermit. Then you leave the secular world, and then you go to live with other people, sometimes to the forest, and then you start focusing on religion and focusing on afterlife. And the final stage, it is when you feel that you are near death, and then you start to leave every link to this life. You focus on liberation, and if you reach that, then you will have reached liberation and you will be reborn again. Again, this is in theory, and this is a way of combining everything, because otherwise, try to imagine what would happen to a society if everybody gave up taking care of their children because they have to focus on religion and so on. And this was a very nice way that the Indian priests found to bring everything together. Another interesting point is what the fundamental goals of life for a Hindu are. And according to traditional Hindu thought, the 4 fundamental purusarthas, and that means goals of human life, are moksha. We have already mentioned this. It is deliverance, liberation from the cycle of reincarnation. Then dharma, and dharma means duty. And this is very important, the definition of dharma, and I will come back to this in the next slide. But also it's important that one fundamental goal of life is artha, wealth. It is important because if you are going to be a householder, then you cannot let your wife and your children starve. And you have to take care of all sorts of material things. This is something that is very shocking for some people, because many people think that India is only spirituality and that Indian people do not pay attention to wealth and to the material world. This is not true according to the traditional Hindu thought. You have to take care of your wife, you have to take care of your children, and then you have to make sure that they have a good way of life. And then another fundamental goal of life is karma, love. And this is basically the duty of women. And I don't have the time to go in depth into this, but women and karma, women and love are usually mentioned together in a lot of traditional Hindu works. And this also explains why in Hindu temples you find images of love and of sex, because sex is not something forbidden in Hindu thought. The only limit for karma and for wealth is that you shouldn't pay so much attention to wealth and love that they prevent you from reaching the most important goal, that is deliverance. The idea is that you have to find a balance between these four fundamental goals of life, and you have to find the time when to know when it is appropriate to pay attention to wealth, to know when it is appropriate to pay attention to love, to know when you have to focus on deliverance, and all the time to be able to fulfill your duty. That is crucial. And the idea of dharma is very important. We can translate dharma as religious duty, but we also can translate dharma simply by as law or as religious law. It is all this together. Basically, it is the idea of knowing what your place in this world is and behave according to that. If you are a man, you have to behave like a man. If you are a woman, you have to behave like a woman. If you are a child, you have to behave like a child, as long as you are a child. Then you will go through another stage and you will have to behave differently. It is not the idea that we have in Western tradition that, for instance, there are 10 commandments that are the same for everyone in Christian tradition. If I cannot tell you the 10 commandments for women, or the 10 commandments for children, or the 10 commandments for senior people. They are all the same for everyone. But in Indian tradition, your duties are different according to many different factors. For instance, we have the concept of swadharma, the behavior that is appropriate depending on your jati, your station, your caste, so to say. The ashram dharma, the behavior that is appropriate according to your stage of life, and I have already mentioned these stages of life. The kula dharma, the behavior that is appropriate according to the family you belong to. And even the abhadharma, the behavior that is appropriate in a moment of crisis. So you must change and accommodate your behavior according to the different stages in your life, and basically you have to know where you are in every time, what your place in the world is, and behave accordingly. Remember the idea of karma yoga. If you behave according to your duty, then you won't be polluted by your actions. If you don't behave according to your duty but moved by your own interest, your own personal interest and so on, then you will be polluted and you will be, and the punishment for that will be that you won't be able to reach liberation because you have been too involved in this world. And this is the basis for the idea of caste in India. I will skip these slides because we are running short of time, but the idea of caste is linked to the idea of rebirth. You are born into a caste, and the difference between a caste and a social class is that you can escape from a social class. Think, for instance, of the traditional American narrative. If you work hard enough, if you are lucky enough, then even if you are born in a poor family, you can become rich and you will have a better life and you will change your status in society. This is something that you cannot think even of in traditional Hindu thought, because if you are born inside a caste, then you must belong, you will belong inside that caste for your whole life, and you are expected to behave according to that. People belonging to one caste are expected to have special jobs, to take care of special things, and this is the main division. The other castes are the caste of the Brahmans, the priests, the Kshatriyas, the warriors, and the Vaishyas, the merchants, cattle herders, and artisans. Then we have the lower caste, the Shudras, the servants, and then we have people that are even lower, that don't have even a caste, and those are the Dalits or untouchable. Obviously this is changing in modern India because Indian constitution, well, many people say that Indian constitution bans castes. This is not accurate because this is what the Indian constitution says about castes, and as you can see on the slide, they only say that you cannot be discriminated according to your caste, but obviously constitution cannot ban caste because constitution is civil and castes belong to religion. What the Indian constitution says is that you shouldn't be discriminated according to your caste. But this is theory, and one thing is theory and one thing is practice. As I was saying before, especially in big cities, well, obviously you cannot know the caste that someone that is sitting next to you on the train or wherever belongs. But in rural areas, people know what caste their neighbors belong to, and so discrimination is easier. But and there are also, the government, Indian government, is aware of this, and they try to fight this discrimination. And for instance, there is a special number of places reserved to lower caste people in universities, in government jobs, and so on, to try to promote people belonging to lower castes and avoid discrimination. But there is still a lot to do about this. Stop this, okay. And I will finish. Well, this was only to a reminder that even people who don't pay so much attention to caste are still reluctant to allow their children to marry people belonging to other castes. And in fact, in many Indian newspapers today, you still find matrimonials. That is, people looking for a bride or a groom for their children because they want them to marry inside their own caste. Take into account that in India nowadays about 80% of marriages are still arranged marriages. Some modern people allow the man and the woman to meet each other before the marriage, and if they feel that they are going to be absolutely incompatible, they won't force them to get married. But that's something modern, just allowing them to meet before the marriage and deciding whether they want to go on or not. Then this brings us to another interesting question in Indian society: the importance of hierarchy, because even nowadays hierarchy in India is more important than in Western countries, and that's something that that you should be aware of if you are going to work or you are going to study in India. I just wanted to recommend you a couple of good readings. If you want to read only one book about modern India, my recommendation is this book, The Indians, Portrait of a People, by Sudhir Kakar and Katarina Kakar. It is a comprehensive book, but only about 200 pages long, and it will be very informative, and you can find a lot of interesting information about modern India in this book. These are also additional recommended readings: Being Indian by Pavan Varma, and In Spite of the Gods, The Rise of Modern India by Edward Hughes. And if you want to know a bit about the history of India, my recommendation is Al-Basam, The Wonder That Was India. And if you want to read some of the traditions about the obligations and the duties of the different castes and the obligations of men in contrast to women and so on, then I would recommend you to read some of the chapters of the Laws of Manu, and this is the most important legal, so-called legal book of traditional India. And if you want to have some more information, you can contact me because I will be here in the faculty, so I'm very accessible. Thank you so much for your attention.